Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Amanda Lamb. In today's deep dive conversation, we're talking with WRAL's Hidden History reporter Heather Leah about the mysteries beneath the surface of North Carolina's lakes. Welcome to the program, Heather.
Happy to be here.
So deep dive actually works today when we're talking about this story. I remember one of my first experiences in North Carolina, scuba diving. I was getting certified in the old rock quarry in Rollsville. I was back in the 1990s. They call it Fantasy Lake. And there was a school bus under there, an airplane. You know, these are man-made lakes. And obviously, in this case, it was put there for the scuba divers. But basically, there are a lot of things like that in North Carolina. And most of us who go to these lakes, swim on them, go out on a boat, we don't even know what's there, right? Tell me about that.
There's so much under these lakes. For me, the first one I ever learned about was Jordan Lake. And, you know, I'd been out there on a boat, I'd been out there fishing, and I had no idea that there was an entire community under that lake, and that there had been farms there. There had been people there that had lived there as far as European settlers going back to the 1700s, and then, of course, even earlier than that, the Tuscarora. It was called the New Hope Valley, and it was it was a very fertile land, but it flooded all the time, and so that's why they eventually turned it into a lake. But there's even the potential that there are graves down there, very likely that there are graves beneath Jordan Lake. Lake Norman has an airplane. Carr Lake has a train beneath it. There's a lake out there in the mountains, Lake Fontana, that has, when the lake lowers, you can see the buildings still underneath this lake. So there's a ton underneath these lakes that we just don't even know about.
That's amazing. So I was reading one of your reports about the airplane that crashed and I guess sank in 1974 in Lake Norman, but they didn't find it until 2013. Yeah. Tell me about that.
So Lake Norman, first of all, is incredible. There's a lot of stories with Lake Norman. There's the idea that there might be a Loch Ness monster that they call, is it Nessie, that they have under there? So they have a tale of a Loch Ness monster, which is probably either a sturgeon or a really big catfish. There's, of course, the airplane under there. There's a Revolutionary War battlefield under there, and there are communities under there, churches under there, buildings under there. So there's quite a lot. But the airplane, it was only 90 feet beneath the surface, which means that is pretty deep, but it was just down there for decades and no one knew. And then they were doing diving drills. It was fire department doing diving drills, and they happened to see it down there. So it's pretty incredible that this airplane's been down there this whole time. And you can actually see it. There are pictures of like radar infrared, like going over the lake, and you can see the airplane down there, the shape of it beneath the lake.
And you've got to wonder, like, why nobody reported that an airplane had dropped into the lake at some point.
Yeah, you know, there's a family that actually had said they think the airplane could be, like, their kin's family, like their airplane from, you know, a generation or so before, because they have a record of, like, a personal plane crash in their family in the 70s. So I'm not even certain that they know who that plane belongs to still. It's just down there.
It's just a mystery. You know, and another fascinating story, Carr Lake, which is in Vance and Warren counties, there was a train. Tell me about that fell from a train trestle.
Yeah, you know, the train beneath Carr Lake is one of those other stories that just kind of blew my mind when I learned it, because I had been swimming in Carr Lake. And of course, the only thing that I worried about beneath the lake was when I swam was like fish touching my leg or snakes touching my leg. But there's an entire train down there. So Carr Lake, again, these are all man-made, right? They haven't always been there, and that's why there's stuff under there in many cases. So in this case, it was a crash that led to this being down there. So the Carr Lake was created in the 1950s, but long before the lake was there was a railroad trestle that ran across Nutbrush Creek, which was the body of water that had been there before. And so, you know, this railroad trestle back in 1918. So think about that. We're talking over a century. This train has been down there beneath this lake. There was a train. It was called Engine Number 2. And tried to cross the trestle. And the trestle had been weakened by a forest fire. And I'm not sure why they didn't.
Why they thought crossing it was a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. And it collapsed. And the entire engine fell into the creek below. And it remains there to this day. Apparently, it's not just a little part of a train. It's the engine, the tender, and 3 cars. So it's a big train hidden under there, and 2 people died when it crashed too. So
that's a really unusual thing, though, to be underneath a lake or beneath the lake surface for sure. Well, we will be back after the break with more from Heather Leah about more that is below Jordan Lake in Chatham County. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm talking with Heather Leah about the hidden history that can be found at the bottom of North Carolina's lakes beneath the surface. So you mentioned Jordan Lake in Chatham County. I mean, whole communities, farms, even grave sites. How did this all get there?
Yeah, so Jordan Lake, this is the one that probably has, to me, one of the richest histories, right? So Jordan Lake, there are entire communities that have vanished beneath that lake. When they decided to create Jordan Lake, it was because that land, again, the New Hope Valley, it had flooded many times, but it created really fertile soil. And so everyone wanted to put their farms there. And there's actually a story from the 1700s. Before the lake was there, long before the lake was there, it was a valley. And that valley right there, kind of in the center of the state, made it difficult if you were a colonist trying to come in from the coast. You really couldn't cross and get across to the other part of the state. You'd have to go all the way north around the valley or all the way south. And no one had built a bridge because it would be very expensive. Well, one kind of unfortunate farmer ended up inheriting land on both sides of the valley, and he really couldn't use it because he couldn't cross easily. And so he finally built a bridge. And at first that seemed like a really stroke of bad luck, but he ended up charging people to use the bridge, and then he built a tavern on one half of the
which was a big draw.
Yeah, so people would pay to use the bridge, and then they'd stay in the tavern and pay to stay there. And it was called Cypress Tavern. So there was a lot of history there, and these communities were springing up. Seaforth was one of them that is now just a dot in the lake. There was the Pea Ridge community. There's a community called Friendship, which is actually one of the earliest integrated communities back when segregation was still commonplace. The town of Friendship, or the community of Friendship, I should say, was integrated. And parts of that are now affected by Jordan Lake being flooded. Now, finally, there was a hurricane that came through. It just caused so much damage, and it was so expensive to keep fixing it up that the government decided, let's make this a lake. They needed a source of water, and this seemed like a decent place to make it. But a lot of the people, it depends on who you talk to, they had to sell their land, their generations-long land that had been with their families for a long time.
Sold it to the government?
To the government,
right,
yeah.
Okay.
And, many of them even today will claim they feel they weren't paid enough.
Sure.
So
taken advantage of.
Yeah. So it was, it was contentious. I do know, if you've heard of the Village Subway, which is the kind of secret hidden underground, quote, mall beneath the former Cameron Village, now the Village District. That's another story about a hidden underground place that was sealed away. But I do know that they decorated those clubs using things that they stole out of houses that were abandoned before Jordan Lake was flooded. So, there's this connection between these two
really
secret underground histories, right? But yeah, a lot of that history was flooded, and a lot of it's still down there. Now, as far as the graves, I don't think there's documentation of graves down there. However, there are families. They did live there, and they talked about that they didn't move all of the graves that were on their family farm.
There has to be some graves there. And that's got to be really hard because you can't access that history anymore. And so for those families, it's lost.
Yeah. And if you drive in that area today, you will see around Jordan Lake, you'll notice, first of all, roads that disappear into the lake. I've walked out on one of those roads. It literally goes out into the lake and then just crumbles and vanishes. Yep.
Wow.
But you can see on a map where it would have connected. There's also a lot of old abandoned homes just kind of falling apart.
So right at the edge.
Right at the edge where they left and they didn't come back, but the homes haven't been torn down and they're just there, just kind of a reminder of the history that used to be in that area.
And I would imagine if you look at any man-made lake, not just in North Carolina, but anywhere in the country, these things exist.
I would think so. You know, we did a podcast a few months ago on the Road to Nowhere.
Right.
And that is another lake, Lake Fontana, flooded entire communities in the mountains in Swain County. Similar story. And these people can no longer access even their families' graves. Some of them aren't underwater, but they've been flooded and you can't access them.
You can't get to them. They're on land, but you can't get to them.
Right. So this is common with man-made lakes. So you never know what you're boating over top.
When it gets warmer and everybody's out swimming, they might not have any idea what lurks beneath them, whether it's Nessie or a town or an airplane or a train. So
yeah, but they know now if they listen to this podcast.
They will. So tell us where people can access your hidden history stories.
Yeah, so if you want more of this kind of stuff and to learn about the hidden history you walk past every day, you go to WRAL.com and you just search hidden history. There'll be a list.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather, for this fascinating look at what lurks beneath the surface of North Carolina's lakes. And thank you for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and making us part of your morning routine. If you like what you're hearing, please rate us on Apple Podcasts or whatever podcast app you use. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email that's waiting in your inbox every morning with Triangle news, events, and headlines to get you ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.